Okay, guys, welcome. Is it coming through, Anthony?
I'm not seeing anything yet.
No?
It's sometimes a little delayed, so it might be like a 15. Oh, there it goes. Now it's coming in. All
Okay,
right, we're live.
welcome, guys. Looks like everyone's starting to come in. I see 20 people in here now. Sebastian, is that what you see?
Yeah, about 18 watching right now, so I think we're good.
Okay, awesome. Okay, guys, so welcome to our inaugural live stream event on the McNallie Money YouTube channel. Obviously, Power Mining Analysis is the host of this. We've also welcomed our good friend Sebastian. A lot of you follow him as well to come talk to us about the post-halving action and activity we're seeing in the market. So, guys, how are you feeling right now? Welcome to the channel, Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. We've been friends for, gosh, probably over a year to 2 years now. We've been in the space for a long time, and I've had Anthony on before, and I think McNallie, we did also an interview together, right? But it wasn't live. So this is kind of a fun thing to do, I think, especially with the having event. I mean, it's such a crazy ride right now with the fees going up and everything. We'll get into all that. But again, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, great to have you on the show, Sebastian.
Yeah, we've all been buddies for quite some time now, back when we were in the bear market, and obviously times are looking a little bit better now. And one of the big reasons for that is all of the transaction fees and this new sensation around all the runes. So before we get into the question and answers, that's going to be the meat and potatoes of today's session, you guys. We're going to be running about an hour, so get your questions ready. But I don't think anyone was expecting the kind of action and hash price we're seeing now post-halving. So maybe I'll kick it over to you, Sebastian, since you're the guest. What do you make of hash price right now? This is incredible for the miners, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, hash price, everybody was expecting hash price to come down in the 50s, which it did for a short period of time, and then it just bounced right back up. It's now above, I believe, $150 or more per hash price. So it's basically, instead of the halving, it's like the tripling that people are calling it right now, which is just fantastic for the miners. They're just making bank right now, but how long will this last? That's the real big question going forward. I was on a space last night with some developers for the runes, and some were saying that the fees could be elevated for like 3 to 6 months, which at that point, I mean, the miners might not be at a loss of anything if this continues going forward. Instead of being down 50% in revenue, they're going to be possibly up 50% in revenue from where they were. But just all depends on how long the stuff maintains.
Yeah, the issue is going to be, though, that with the revenues this high, and at the moment it's about $156 a terahash. So this is getting on for 3 times where it should be. You're going to have more mining machines getting plugged in because it's profitable to mine still.
So the hash rate.
Therefore, the difficulty is going to increase. That means, the North American miners, which we both cover in our analysis, it means that, although revenue is going to increase, production is going to be down. So, that's a trade-off. The other interesting factor for the last sort of, since the halving, last 15, 16 hours, is that, when I last looked, Marathon Digital only mined 1 block. And bear in mind, when you've got sort of between 18 and 28 exahash, energized, you'd expect them to be mining more than 1 block in that sort of period. I mean, some days recently they've been mining 5 or 6 blocks. So, they've missed that opportunity. But obviously, if these rewards are staying, as you indicated, for the next few months, then obviously they'll play catch up.
Well, and some of those initial blocks were super, super lucrative. So the people that were grabbing the blocks and the Satoshis right after halving, I heard upwards of $1 million for the single first sat post-halving. So we'll see how long these last. Now, Sebastian, the other interesting thing is the evolution of these runes. So I'm understanding this as kind of a second iteration of what we saw last halving, really, with all the sensation around the inscriptions and all that kind of stuff. Do you think runes are here to stay, or do you think that's going to be a phase like NFTs and the rest there?
Based on what I was listening to yesterday on Twitter Spaces with the developers, they seem to think it's going to be a much better vehicle for like the ordinals. So runes now is basically a different protocol, I believe, the way they stated it. So it's going to be much more efficient as far as utilization of the network, things like that. But it also obviously is gaining a lot of traction and interest from people that want to do meme coins on Bitcoin now network, right? So that's all being driven by that. So we'll have to see how that demand continues going forward. I mean, it's anybody's guess right now. How will that go forward into the next 3 months, 6 months, a year out? Will that interest still be there, or is it just this type of hype train right now where eventually it goes down in hype?
Yeah. Well, and that's a good segue. So everyone's here obviously to talk about Bitcoin miners. So the runes are great, transaction fees are great, but what we're going to have now, I'm so excited for Monday's open, is we've had these miners severely pulling back and depressed based on this news about having revenues cut in half, all the rest. Now we're in a situation where hash price is actually exceeding what it was pre-halving. We're going to be in a real situation where there's a mismatch here, I think, of expectation versus reality. So we can move into the question section now. It looks like we've got about 80 people, but I think we're going to have quite a few happy viewers in the audience, as am I, to see what happens on Monday with the open of a lot of these companies. So we'll get right into the questions here, you guys. I'll switch over to the question screen. Looks like the chats are working. So first one I see on the screen here, Mark LeBlanc, he's a longtime viewer of both of our channels. Global hash rate, and this was going to be a question for you, Sebastian. Anthony, you alluded to the higher the hash price, the more machines are going to be plugged in. We're seeing global hash rate, according to Mark, at around 630 exahash. Where do we see that going here in the next couple of weeks?
I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it's going to continue to go up. Right now, like Anthony said, it's just too profitable for any miner to shut down for right now. Even the miners that had older machines, they might be plugging those things in right now because it's just so profitable. So I expect the network hash rate to continue to go up as long as we see those BTC transaction fees being added in there. And it still goes into play with what I was thinking maybe by the end of the year, we might be like 850 exahash to 900 exahash in the network, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, there was talk in January of a 25-30% drop in the hash rate at the halving date. And then in the last few weeks, that's scuttled down to about 5 to 10%. But when you're getting these sort of rewards, nobody's switching off. This is, you'd be wanting to be switching on. So, some of the miners have got machines. I know some of the miners have got, we're talking like 1 or 2 exahash of machines that they've taken off and replaced in recent months to make them more efficient. Those machines go back in because of the rewards at the moment. That's an opportunity for them as well.
It certainly is. So now, next comment we're going to see on the screen here from WP. Love all you guys. Good support here. It's a nice community within the Bitcoin space. There's room for all of us here, just like the miners. We're not competing with each other. I'm thinking people are going to flood into the miners on Monday. I'm thinking the exact same thing. And unfortunately, I'm thinking it's going to be a lot of people who got shaken out of the miners last week when they were worried about the rewards being cut in half. What do you think we're going to see in terms of volume on Monday, Anthony?
I mean, if the Bitcoin price and the reward stays the are through this weekend and carry on, then that's revenues that nobody was predicting. So that's going to impact share prices, no doubt whatsoever. Because share prices are generally, if the market's doing it properly, they're looking at what's the expected coming through. And the halving, it was literally nobody mentioned runes. I mean, in any major detail. I mean, we knew they were coming in, like the NFTs came in, and whether it was going to be a month or 2 months or 6 months. But it wasn't talked in any excess, and it was really about how a miner is going to cope with 3.125 Bitcoin. And we've seen them getting sort of like 18, 19, 20 Bitcoin per block since the halving. So, and that's not, I'm looking at the graph now on the other screen, and it's just going up, in the same angle since the halving occurred. So I'd expect, obviously the Bitcoin price is another, that's the real issue. I mean, it's like getting lots of rewards, but the Bitcoin price is still important in this factor. And if the Bitcoin price holds where it is, then I'd see some uplift in the mining stocks on Monday.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, I think people obviously got shaken out before the halving event. There was a lot of fear, a lot of FUD going into the space. Everybody was thinking half revenues, right? This is going to be blood in the streets. Miners going to be shutting off, everything else. But as we've seen Bitcoin price going up in value, when they got to like 60, 70,000, like there's not going to be a lot of people shutting down at that point. And now with the transaction fees being an additional boom to them, I mean, I'm looking at the latest block here. It's basically 10 BTC in one block with fees and everything else. I mean, that's more than we were seeing before the halving event. So I think there's going to be obviously some people going to be trying to buy as much as they can potentially on Monday or next week. But it also depends on Bitcoin price, like Anthony said.
Now, question for you guys. The interesting thing about this is we're not really seeing a big move in the price of Bitcoin. So we were having a lot of people who were saying, hey, you know what? I had lots of comments calling me an idiot for being in the miners, saying I should be in the ETFs, the 2 times leveraged ETFs. What we're going to see here, you guys, this is extremely beneficial and a huge upside surprise for the miners. Really has no impact on Bitcoin price itself or on the ETFs. What do you make of that one, Sebastian?
Well, sometimes Bitcoin and Bitcoin miners decouple from each other, right? And you have people switching from Bitcoin miners going over to MicroStrategy, or they'll switch over to the ETFs, and they'll do the same thing. They'll rotate back into the miners eventually when they see fit. So I think that we're going to see the same thing. I think the miners will outperform the ETFs going forward. Is it going to be next week? I don't know. Is it going to be in a month potentially? But I think down the road, within the next 12 months, the miners will outperform.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to say as well, which was it was mentioned in the Spaces meeting yesterday, and Cantor Fitzgerald have just released their document yesterday based on the Bitcoin miners and looking at costs going into the halving, and they've started now looking at what some of these miners are doing above and beyond pure Bitcoin mining. So they're looking at the hosting deals that they've got, they're looking at the HPC revenues that they're earning, and now they're starting to include those in what they think is the trajectory going forward. So actually, it was quite interesting to see that post-halving, the miners that came out top of the Cantor Fitzgerald analysis were Bitdeer and Bit Digital. And I think we've all talked about, the benefits of those two. Effectively, I mean, Bitdeer is a mid-tier miner, but Bit Digital is a small miner. And with about 2.8 exahash, but they've got this massive HPC contract, and you just can't ignore that amount of that size of contract. I mean, at the moment it's 50 million, and if you look at the miners who are also going into that space, so you look at IREN have got about 11 million annualized contract at the moment. Hive Digital, 10 million annualized contract at the moment, hoping to grow to 15 by the end of the year. Bit Digital have got 50 at the moment, hoping to grow to 100 annualized by the end of the year. So, we've been saying, why aren't analysts picking this up in the city and in Wall Street and saying, but it appears now that they are doing that. And so, when you're looking at who can produce Bitcoin at the lowest cost, it's now these two miners are seen to be doing that, and not, then you've got the likes of, some of the more established, names that you'd expect to see at the top. But there's been a lot of controversy as to whether Bitcoin miners should go into HPC space. I firmly believe, if you've got the ability to get a really good return, and based on the Bitcoin price at the moment, Sam Tabar came on the podcast and said, if Bitcoin price was $100,000, they'd still be making more margins on HPC. And so he's all about, he wants to see revenues where he's not having to guess where the revenue is coming from. He wants some sort of normalization. So therefore, half their business, and it literally is half their business. Think back to 2023, they mined something like $45 million in Bitcoin mining, and they've got a 50 million annualized HPC contract last year. So half their revenues at the moment are coming from that type of business. And it just wasn't getting recognized. But it looks like now there's been a shift. And it'd be interesting to see what some of the other main Wall Street analysts start including in their predictions as they come out. But Cantor came out yesterday, and we'll share some of that information on our YouTube podcast this week to highlight to people. And I'll also do a little bit of analysis to sort of make sure that the numbers they're using are the numbers that I've used as well, because I've done a lot of analysis in the past, and sometimes it's not correlated with what Cantor's coming out. But I did look at yesterday, and I recognize some of the numbers they are using. So I think it's getting close to where it should be now.
Now, a question for you guys. We'll move into some company-specific questions now, you guys. So feel free to throw questions in the comment section here. We've got a lot for Bitfarms, I've noticed, and we've also got quite a few in here for Core Scientific. So what I'm thinking here is, because this will be, if it sustains at these levels of hash price and all the transaction fees and rune rewards, we're going to have a real mismatch like I talked about. Now, we had Adam Sullivan on the program, Anthony, talking about the way that their debt's structured. And essentially, once they get into that mid $6 price point range, that first tranche of warrants can be converted, and that's really going to alleviate their debt position. I would imagine now this could be a major game changer for them and Bitfarms, who are under quite a bit of criticism. Their share price had pulled back a lot. Where do you guys see these individual miners going if these prices sustain as we're seeing right now?
I'll answer that one first, and I'll let Sebastian put his, because he'll talk about future share price. But I'll tell you now that if the Core Scientific share price gets to the level of that first warrant gets purchased, and that revenue from them warrants come in, and it clears the debt, which is what it's planned to do. What you'll have then is you'll have a company. If you look at the amount of shares in issue at that point in time, you'll have a company with an actual market capitalization with zero debt of about $2.18 million, with 22 exahash of self mining, a hosting business of about 6.5 exahash, and a HPC business with 100 million a year in revenues, because they've already stated that's where they're going to be anyway. They've got contracts for that. And so, if you then start comparing that market capitalization, that business, say with the likes of CleanSpark, who are at the moment a 17 exahash miner with a $4 billion market capitalization, that suggests to me that there's probably some way to go for Core Scientific. One thing that Core Scientific does, pretty much better than most miners is it produces Bitcoin on a daily basis where it should be doing. So, they announce on every day how much they're mining, and it's 28, 29, 30 every day. You're coming up with them numbers. It's not coming up with we mined 3 or 5 or 7 or 38 or 50. It's real. They're really good at what they do production wise. They're not, in terms of production by exahash, they're not going to maybe compete with Bitfarms or Hive Digital, who them two miners for the last 3 years have been, very good at getting the most out of the machines. But you've got to think about Core Scientific is a large scale miner. It's got 19.3 exahash of self mining, so it's got 2 or 3 times what those two companies have got added together. So it's a different ball game. But they produce, and they've produced the most Bitcoin 2021, 2022, 2023, and already in Q1 of 2024, they are the largest producer, even though they've got 10 exahash less than Marathon Digital. So Core Scientific, I think is something that people should be paying a lot more attention to. Adam came on the podcast. It was a great podcast. If people didn't watch it, go back and watch that podcast, understand more about Core Scientific, do your research, and you'd be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, because when I get questions from my viewers on my channel about Core, I go, check out that video with Adam from you guys, because it's a great video. He went really deep into how those warrants work and everything else. So that was a great video by you guys and a great interview. But with Core, I agree. I mean, Core is just way undervalued from where they should be, just based on their performance, their operations, what they're generating each day. If you just look at their peers, which would be basically CleanSpark and Marathon, somewhere in between there, they're way undervalued for that. And I think a lot of fear for them is the bankruptcy. That's still looming over their head a little bit. I think once we see maybe a quarter or two of financial results, things may kind of, calm down a little bit for that. I think the fear also is with the warrants diluting there, but the dilution is not going to be that great. So even if it dilutes them 100%, which is not, the stock is still way, way, way undervalued from where it should be. And as far as Bitfarms is concerned, Bitfarms, they had obviously the CEO stepping down here. They're trying to find a new CEO. They're also in Paraguay. There was some FUD in Paraguay as well about putting a ban on mining for 180 days, something like that. But that was on illegal mining, so that was more on new mining. And I think there's just a lot of FUD right now going around that stock as well. The ATM is another one, right? Dilution. People are fearful of that. We saw that with other miners. We saw that with IREN. We saw that with CleanSpark. Whenever they have an ATM, they're pulling on it hard. You see the stock kind of flounder a little bit in the short term for a couple months. But after that, it usually picks up really nicely, especially if they provide that they are fully funded to 21 exahash. So I think there's still a lot of upside to both Core and to Bitfarms as well, especially if transaction fees stay high like they are right now. I mean, they're just going to be making a lot of money right now.
I'd like to add as well that when Core Scientific came out of Chapter 11 in January, and they had a plan, and they have to sell their Bitcoin on a daily basis as part of that sort of like that recovery plan that they put in place. One of the conditions, they must sell on a daily basis. Hence, they're selling all their production, and they also get paid in Bitcoin for their hosting service. So they don't get paid in fiat; they get paid in Bitcoin. So when you see their monthly updates and they're selling more than they mine, it's because the hosting Bitcoin as well is being sold on a daily basis. But when that plan came out in January, the Bitcoin price was $42,000. Now today, the Bitcoin price is probably hovering. I haven't looked today. I think probably around 64,000, maybe just under 64,000. So that's like 50% more revenues than was planned back in January. And nobody was going to predict that we were going to get an all-time high in January before the halving. Everyone was expecting, Bitcoin price to drop, and then post the halving, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months later, as in previous cycles, the Bitcoin price ramps up. What that extra revenue, you're looking at an extra $20,000 a Bitcoin. They're mining 30 a day on average, so that's an extra $600,000 a day. What's that doing to their, to their position? And only this week they announced, bigger, further expansion. I think there's another 72 megawatts in Denton that they're going to be, utilizing there. So, they've got a conservative growth at the moment to 22.8 exahash, and that's not, that's not significantly high where they are at the moment. It's only a couple of exahash more than where they are at the moment. But actually, I think now, because of what's happened there and the HPC contract, I think they're able to do more quicker. And all these extra things that they're doing at the moment, if the Bitcoin price stays where it is, it only just adds to the fact that people should be doing a lot more research into this company. And if you look at the valuation of Bitfarms compared to Core Scientific, I haven't looked. I think Bitfarms at the moment has got a higher market capitalization than Core Scientific, and Bitfarms is on 7 exahash. Now, Bitfarms is probably one of the top 3 in terms of popularity. Sebastian, you've done you've done votes on through your subscribers on this, and I've done one for the last 3 years on the miners, and Bitfarms is the only mining company to finish top 3 in all the 3 I've done. Where I've asked the shareholders to come back and give me their top 3 picks. In 2021, Bitfarms, Hut, and Hive were at the top of the ladder, and then Marathon and Riot came in with Bitfarms. And this year, it's Bitfarms, CleanSpark, and IREN, not necessarily in that order, but those were the top 3. And I found that in your recent analysis as well, that's what came out there. So even it looks like the samples that we're using are big enough to have the same, very similar results. And then you had sort of like the likes of Marathon, Riot, Wolf, not in that particular order, but sort of like coming up behind those 3. So Bitfarms has maintained its popularity. The one question I sort of like ask myself is, having just reached 7 exahash, and bear in mind it's taken a while to get from sort of 6 exahash to 7 exahash, they've got to go another 14 exahash in the next 7 or 8 months. And so who's going to be the first miner that comes in before the end of the year and says we're not going to reach our growth target, I just find some of these targets are really quite challenging. Now they've got to increase sites in not just one location but in different countries. So obviously Paraguay at the moment is 1 exahash. That's going to 8 exahash. That's like growing the size of Bitfarms at the moment in Paraguay for the remainder of the year. Now we can see what Riot Platforms, they issued their photographs of Corsicana today. That site was bought 2 years ago, and they just energized. I appreciate the lead time of some of these pieces of equipment take a while, and Bitfarms might have all that in, and I don't want to say Bitfarms won't reach it, but believe you me, there's some miners that have got 13, 14 exahash to achieve in the next sort of 8 months. That's going to be challenging, and it'll just be interesting to see if any of them come out and say we might be a few months out.
Yeah, it's always good giving those optimistic projections and targets. It's not so good if you can't deliver. I will say though, the additional income from these transaction fees never hurts. More money definitely helps speed things up in construction. Now, I've seen a couple comments about our good friend Tom from Talking Investing. We did invite him to this. He definitely is a little bit harder to get a hold of, but we're happy to have Tom on. Tom, if you check this out, make sure you make the next one, buddy. If you want to bring George, that's fine too. We'd love to have you. Now, IREN, this is one that we talk about quite a bit. Sebastian, you do as well. We've talked about, in our opinion, we looked at their enterprise value, their cash position, some of their infrastructure. We've actually got them coming on Monday to our channel to talk specifically about the AI division. Now, I've been seeing some really interesting pieces on X talking about how the market itself is undervaluing the miners' infrastructure, and they don't understand how valuable these data centers are going to be down the road and the operation side of it. So let's talk about IREN a little bit, because I know they've got a really good position in terms of balance sheet, a lot of cash, a very strong following, and they're getting involved through poolside agreement with the AI HPC space. What are your thoughts on this one, boys?
Go ahead, Anthony.
You go first, Seb.
With IREN, I like their growth and I like their operations. They're really efficient when it comes to operation side of things, but I'm more intrigued in their growth going forward, like I am with CleanSpark and Bitfarms. That's the reason I'm in them, plus the operation side of things. With them, they have the Childress facility there in Texas that they're building out, right? That's a huge facility that can utilize a lot of megawatts going forward. So they have a growth plan going forward into that. The interesting side on the AI side of things is I think the current contract they have is extended for another 3 months, I believe. Right. So it's not a very long window on those contracts. I would like to see those be a year, 2 years, 3 years. But I think it's just right now they're at least getting some interest on the AI side, but it's not for long term. And I'd like to see that. I don't know why that is. I don't know if the customer's just kind of feeling the waters out a little bit as far as what's going on with that space, how much it's going to cost them and things like that. But that's definitely interesting there. They do have the infrastructure to build out there, which is great. And based on where they are right now, they're kind of undervalued, but they also reported just recently, I think it was like a week or two ago, that they're fully funded to 20 exahash, right? And the stock popped, but then Bitcoin fell down and it kind of drove everything else down. So it didn't really get the traction that we've seen, like with CleanSpark. Yeah, when Bitcoin was going up, they reported they're fully funded to 20 exahash or 16 exahash, and the stock took off. So I think the stock will do really well going forward. It's just we need Bitcoin to go up, and with the sats going up right now, fees and everything else, that's going to help too.
Yeah. So a couple of points. If you look at what their cash balance was on the last reported quarter, which was the end of 2023, they had about $90 million in cash in their treasury. And only a few weeks ago, they announced they had $300 million. So they've been using the ATM over that first few months of the year. That will have suppressed the share price a little bit. So it hasn't managed to sort of like grow in the same way that CleanSpark have utilized their ATM. But that announcement that they've now managed to raise sufficient funding to get them to 20 exahash is amazing, because there was an option for 9 exahash. And they paid a 10% deposit on that 9 exahash. So, if they didn't go forward with that, they would lose a 10% deposit. It was non-refundable. But that's, I feel, if I compare IREN with Bitfarms, and I hope Bitfarms get there by the end of the year. Believe you me, I have Bitfarms in my portfolio. I have IREN in my portfolio. Anyone who's part of my Patreon knows exactly how many shares I've got in these companies. So, feel free to look and you'll see exactly what I've got. But IREN have got, that site at Childress is massive. It's potentially 600 megawatts. They're only at the moment utilize effectively getting close to the first 100 megawatts of it. So they can quite easily build out on that site. I think they've got close to 200 employees working on that site at the moment. So if I said who's least likely to fail from Bitfarms and IREN, I'd say IREN, because it's all in one facility and they can sort of ramp up in one location and manage from one location, whereas Bitfarms are trying to grow in more than one location all at once. So everything's they've got a lot of moving parts, and we know that go back to Argo Blockchain when they bought the land for the Helios site in the good old days when Argo were in everyone's analysis. they built 200 megawatts of that facility in about 7 months. Now 200 megawatts, in today's money probably gives you 7 or 8 exahash. So it can be done that quickly. IREN still need to achieve. There are 8 at the moment, so they've got another 12 to go. But it's on one site. All their long lead items have already been ordered and are all due to arrive in time for them to be installed, implemented, whatever. And it's just a case of building more of those facilities that you can see on the photographs. In the same way, like we saw the photographs from the Corsicana site, that Riot Platforms. So I'm a firm believer that IREN are in a good place. There's only one area of IREN that still needs to be resolved, and that is still the NIDIG issue. It hasn't gone away yet. If you look at their last quarterly accounts, their legal costs weren't as low as I would have expected, and that's because they're having to sort of like defend their case in the courts with NIDIG on that particular issue there. I mean, they defaulted on the loan and handed back the machines. The machines were valued at $65 million. The loan was about $113 million. So, why would you sort of like continue paying if it's a case of the default mechanism, you hand back the equipment? And so they did exactly that. And they had $50 million sat in the bank. It wasn't like they didn't have any money left, but they felt they could buy new machines, recover that hash rate with the money they had in the bank. And so why wouldn't you do that? And they did. Their hash rate dropped by, I think it was like 3.7 exahash from January early 2023. And then it grew by May, they got back to where they were, and then it just started growing from then. So, in terms of hash rate growth last year, nobody could touch, not even CleanSpark could touch IREN in terms of growth from where they were at the start of the year, which was just over, I think, like 1.5, 1.6 exahash, to where they finished at the end of the year, which was about 6 exahash. So the growth that year was second to none. They've got to do at least that again in 2024. So, but I think theirs is a less challenging plan than what Bitfarms have got. But I really hope both succeed. I really do. And then, CleanSpark are at 17 exahash. They've got to get to 32. Riot are at 12. Well, they're at 12.4 exahash at the Rockdale facility, and they've just switched on Corsicana. Now, that first building in Corsicana will be 3.7 exahash. So we'll be interested to see when they bring out their April update, which will come out in a couple of weeks, how much hash rate they've got there. They didn't disclose yesterday on energization. They just said they'd energized. So, but they said once all the machines in building A1 are plugged in, that's 3.7. At the same time, they're replacing all those miners in the Rockdale facility that are not performing as well. And we had Jason on the podcast, and those questions came from, we had 50 or 60 people asking why their production was low, asking about the cost of reduction. So we asked those questions, and he actually, he came clean and said, look, we've got a lot of machines that aren't working as well as they should be. And so, they're having to replace those machines. That's 4 exahash. So if you look at a miner with 4 exahash, that's like having to replace the likes of Hive Digital. It's not a small, it's not a small piece of work, but they're going to replace those 4 exahash, and they're going to add a further, 3 exahash to get them to 15.2, 15.3 exahash at the Rockdale facility. And with Corsicana going online, that'll get them to 31, 32 exahash by the end of the year.
Gotcha. Now we're going to talk about Wolf and CleanSpark up next. I know those are fan favorites, so get your Wolf emojis and your howls ready here, boys. But before we do, just quickly wanted to say we just launched our podcast on Spotify yesterday for the halving event. So if you guys want to listen in, maybe you're at the gym or driving or whatever, you don't want to watch a YouTube video, that's available now as well. Also our website, powermininganalysis.com. We've revamped the website quite a bit. So there's a couple updates there. Notice we're just about at 200 viewers currently. So make sure you guys hit the like button if you like these joint kind of live streams between the channels. We'll try and get Tom in here as well. But we would appreciate the like and the follow. And if you're new to Sebastian's channel, make sure you jump over there and give him some attention as well. Now, this one, before we get into Wolf and CleanSpark here, you guys, talking about M&A activity. Now, Anthony, I know we've talked a lot on our channel saying we're not expecting any real blockbuster acquisitions, at least between the big public companies that we cover regularly. Sebastian, I'm curious to hear your thoughts there. Our thinking, at least pre-Rune and pre-hash price going berserk here, was a lot of the private miners would have to come offline because they wouldn't be economical anymore post-halving. Now, looks like that was completely wrong, but we'll see how long this lasts. Do you think we're going to see some M&A activity, or do you think that may be delayed now based on the hash price we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, you guys weren't the only ones thinking that. We had obviously executives from CleanSpark and others also thinking that there's going to be some M&As going on because, well, hash is going to come down a little bit because miners are not going to be profitable. But with Bitcoin going up to 70,000, back down to 64, a lot of miners are still profitable. The transaction fees are adding to the profitability as well. There's not probably going to be much in the large scale size M&As, I think, right? The top 5-7 miners that are out there, I don't think they're going to be buying anybody that's below them. And I don't think anybody's going to be wanting to sell either because right now they're just so profitable. So it doesn't really make sense for them to do it. When will we see maybe M&As? Probably not towards the end of this cycle. When we get into a bear cycle again, maybe at that point, some things will happen there. But right now, I just don't see anything happening with those.
I was sat in a conference 2 years ago, and there was probably 7 or 8 of the big miners at that conference. This was in London, the AIM conference in London, and one of the panels discussed merger and acquisitions, and the likes of Ben Gagnon, Chief Mining Officer for Bitfarms, Amanda Fabiano, who's one of the most respected people in this space. She was previously Chief Mining Officer at Galaxy. Now she's one of the directors at TeraWulf. And they were articulating in April 2022, as you could see the Bitcoin price that year dropping, and just after that, if you remember, the likes of Argo Blockchain, Bitfarms themselves announced they had 160 million in debt. Argo were 120 million in debt. Greenwich Mining were 100 million in debt, and the word on the street then was there'll be a lot of merger and acquisitions because the debt was going to consume some of these companies. And to be honest with you, it didn't happen as expected. Yes, Core Scientific went into Chapter 11, but they went to Chapter 11 is a way of trying to to look and sort your issues out, and they spent 12 months doing that with all their creditors, and they came through that, and they've come through stronger. The issue that these companies, and I see so many comments, I'm seeing Marathon buying Core Scientific and CleanSpark buying Bitfarms. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen for one big reason. CleanSpark, I've already explained how they're going to grow. They've made the orders for these new miners to come in, and the price they're paying between $14 and $16 a terahash for the latest miners at Bitmain, the S21 Pros at $16 a terahash. And we did the calculations there. If you're going to grow 7 exahash, you're going to be spending something like 105 million in mining machines. The actual facilities to get to 7 exahash, that's going to be about another 75 million. So $180 million CleanSpark would spend to get to 7 exahash. If you were to buy Bitfarms, you're going to have to get your wallet out and pay something like 800-900 million, because there's going to be a premium on that share price. Anyone that goes and buys one of these miners or tries to take them over, the share price will rocket and there'll be a premium to pay. And you can do searches on this on all types of companies in the technology sector like that. You don't buy companies at the price that the day you start making that decision. The premium will be 20, 30, 40% higher than it is now. So if Bitfarms' market capitalization, it's 600 million, add 30% or 40% onto that there, that gets you between 800 and 900 million. That's about 4 or 5 times how much it's going to cost CleanSpark to grow organically. So why would they do that? These mining companies that said M&A activity, they're looking for distressed assets. They're looking for miners that can't physically carry on. And therefore, they'll go into bankruptcy, and then there'll be pickings of the miners or the facilities out there. And we've seen that with, CleanSpark bought some Mawson facilities and paid very little for the Mawson facilities there. That type of acquisition. They didn't buy Mawson itself, but they bought facilities. And other miners have done the same as well. I think Stronghold had to release some facilities as well. But other miners have done that as well. I don't think at the price today, and I've just looked now, it's sort of like closer to 65,000, 64,000 at the moment Bitcoin price, and with these rewards coming in, I don't think we'll see, if anything's, led to believe what you said before, Sebastian, about these runes taking, maybe the next 6 months and giving great transaction fees. That's going to put some of these miners in a really good position. But it might be opportunities for some of the non-public miners to be, to actually go into this space. It's very, very expensive for a non-public miner to become listed. You're looking at about $10 million. If you want to go to the NASDAQ and you're a non-public miner, you're looking at forking out $10 million in terms of fees, lawyer fees. Griffin Mining, they did a reverse. They actually bought a cannabis company, and they did it like through the back door. Effectively, they bought a company that was listed on the NASDAQ, and then they just sold off everything that they didn't need to do, and it's now a Bitcoin mining company. But they've used that facility. It took them 2 years to go through that. Griffin, wanted to, obviously do it maybe quicker than he did, but it took 2 years. And so some of these non-public miners might look at the fact that actually, if they want to grow, it might be an opportunity for them to be picked up by a public miner. That I wouldn't say, that's not beyond the realms of possibility. But there is no way in this world that any of these public miners are buying another public miner in the current light. I don't see any of the miners that distressed. These mining companies were mining when Bitcoin was $15,000 a terahash back in December 2022. And they're mining at 65,000 today. And the rewards at the moment are significantly higher than they were before the halving. So, that 3.125 Bitcoin it's more like about, 20 Bitcoin that some of these blocks have been receiving, every 10 minutes. So that's my view. Obviously, and no one's got my view, but I think it's a sensible approach. If you look at what look at what CleanSpark is spending to grow, look at what Bitfarms, look at what IREN is spending to. This isn't the size of some of these companies.
Yeah. Speaking of cannabis companies, you guys, another main event here on the calendar today. So happy day to everyone celebrating that. Now, moving along to Wolf here. We're starting to get some Wolf emojis in the comments, as we would think. Sebastian, we were hoping you could do a howl for us. See if
I don't howl.
A 45-second howl.
Can't do that.
No? Okay.
Nope.
Well, then maybe you can answer some questions about Wolf. This is one that we get a tremendous amount of excitement about on our channel. I'm sure you're the same. I'm sure Tom's the same. The Wolf Pack is alive and well. We've had a number of the leaders, Paul Prager on there. He was giving Anthony a hard time about the HODL strategy, although I'm probably the bigger HODL advocate there. Anyways, what do you guys think about Wolf? This is one that I'm really excited about. One of the questions specifically was to you, Sebastian, if you like Wolf and if you're holding them. I personally am. This is a company I really like, especially for the amount of information, knowledge, and connections they have to the power grid and power supply companies that they work with.
Yeah, so I like Wolf. I like them a lot more now that they paid off a lot of the debts, right? And then with Bitcoin price staying elevated right now, the transaction fees being high, that's going to help them pay out that debt off even maybe faster, which is fantastic news for them. Because I think at the end of the day, that was really holding the stock back. Just a lot of fears on the debt that they had there. Operation side of things, they operate really well. They also have great power costs. They also have the joint venture that has like 2-cent power, something like that. So they have great structure for low cost and things like that. Patrick and other team members from Wolf are great. They're very open with the community. They engage with the community. It's fantastic to see it, and I love seeing that. The only thing that I would like to see more is the growth, right? So I'm not investing in Wolf for that reason. I'm going with where there's growth. Obviously, the growth has dilution effects as well for us. But as long as I view it as accretive, that's kind of where I'm going for. And if Wolf comes out, they're going to be going to 20 exahash in the next year and a half or something like that. Yeah, this one I might actually jump on as well.
I agree. And Patrick was extremely transparent on the last 2 Spaces meetings I've been part of when he was on there. I mean, the one that happened a couple of weeks ago with Sebastian and Bitcoin Mining Guy, he answered about an hour of questions. And believe you me, those weren't questions that were sent in advance. Those were live questions on a Spaces meeting. And he never batted any away. He answered every question. And last night he came on the Spaces meeting, which was hosted by Luxor. And again, he was asked questions and he came out. I like what they do. I like the board, and you can see the passion. I mean, yeah, Paul's passion during that podcast. I don't think we've had a more passionate CEO on one of our podcasts. It was a great podcast. For full disclosure, if the Bitcoin miners are selling their Bitcoin production to be, to build hash rate, I haven't got an issue with that whatsoever. But if they're selling, you know, Bitcoin to pay for their, you know, for their salaries and things like that, then that's something different. But if they're doing accretive, you know, growth, that for me is fine. And you know, those half the miners are sort of like hodling at the moment, and they believe the Bitcoin price, you know, is going to go up, and nobody at the moment is going to argue with that. I mean, you know, the halving's occurred, and as I say, you know, we're approaching 65,000 again, so we're only about, you know, 10-15% away from an all-time high. And you know, we all think we've fallen off the end of a cliff over the last couple of weeks in terms of mining stocks. But their whole board, they've got a great board. We've already talked about Amanda Fabiano. I've been on the stage with Nazar Khan at the Amsterdam conference. You know, a great guy, one of the co-founders of TeraWulf, along with Paul there. That debt at the moment, I mean, down to I think 75 million, and they've got a cash balance quite significant. So if you look at like the net debt position, it's significantly less than that. Some of that debt's owned by the founders. So, you know, they're not going to go under a bus quite yet, because then founders can make a decision whether to sort of like, you know, maybe to take equity and replace the debt there. But at the moment, some of that debt belongs to them. You know, they've probably invested money in TeraWulf, and that's, you know, they'll get an interest payment for that as well. So I like what they do. That they've got 8 exahash at the moment. They're growing to 13 by the end of the year, and they've already announced that they're going to grow Nautilus by another 50 megawatts. And when you think they're paying 2 cents per kilowatt hour at Nautilus, that's about as cheap as you can get. There's not many miners that can get that. We know that Jason articulated Riot were paying about 2.1, 2.2 cents at the Rockdale facility based on their energy strategy. Well, TeraWulf, you know, are one of the few miners. If you look at their monthly updates, they put the energy price in there on a month, on, you know, what it costs to mine per Bitcoin. So Patrick's come on the podcast. It was on the Spaces meeting, and Paul's on the podcast said exactly the same thing. Pre-halving, they were mining a Bitcoin at 25,000 all-in cash price, and they said if the Bitcoin price remains at the same level as it was at the halving, then it goes to about 38,000. So if you're thinking today, look at all the cash costs, which are the important things. You know, a business survives on cash flow. So, you know, disregard the depreciation, disregard stock compensation, disregard changes in valuation of Bitcoin, but just look at the cash that's coming into the business, the cash that's going out of the business. You know, so every Bitcoin that's been mined today at 65,000, it's costing them 38,000. You know, currently to mine that Bitcoin. So they're still making a very, very nice margin. And as the margins are good at the moment, that's only going to give them more profits on a daily basis to reduce that debt down further. So, you know, they're doing exactly what Bitfarms did over sort of like 20 months. Bitfarms had 160 million. No one could, you know, when they started putting out their plans to get rid of that, and you could see the like other companies were about to go into Chapter 11, you just felt Bitfarms were doing everything. But Bitfarms came with a plan to sell. They were selling mining machines. They were doing everything to raise capital. TeraWulf aren't in that same position. They do a really good job. That they've got they've got one of the best gross margins out there for mining. So it's in their bailiwick to actually reduce that debt, you know, quickly. And we'll probably see another update in the next month or so like that, or next quarter, to say there's another chunk of that debt come off there with all the profits they're making with the Bitcoin price. It is, and if these rewards stay in, you can just think now that this, you know, if they're still earning 20 Bitcoin a block going forward, you know, that's going to be, you know, we'll expect to see a payment come off that debt quicker than Paul was actually anticipating himself. Like, so that's the only downside at all. And that debt is now, it's in a more manageable position. You know, I mean, it was over 120 million, you know, sort of like at the start of the year. Now it's down to 75. That means the interest payments are also down. So when you're looking at what you're paying on a monthly basis, the cash that's going out, the interest payments are really low. So you can see why TeraWulf in this last sort of 12 months has become a top 5 in terms of popularity of the mining company. And, you know, we know that the Mara pigs are out there and will all day long, but you've got the Wolf Pack out there as well. And, you know, I think in terms of popularity, they're probably overtaking Marathon Digital as we speak.
Well, we all know wolves eat pigs, so we'll see how that dynamic works out. Now, great segue. We're talking or getting some questions about Marathon. So we'll do Mara here, CleanSpark. Then I've seen a couple about Soluna. Bit Digital. We're going to try and cover them all. We may end up going a little bit longer than the hour here. If you guys are enjoying this, make sure you hit the like button. We're almost at 250 live right now, which is pretty incredible. So question here is, I'm in at Mara at 27 bucks. I thought we're going to the 40s. We've seen a lot of questions. Is Mara going to hit 80 again? Is it going to hit an all-time high? So 3-part question for you boys here. First of all, what do you think of Mara's performance or lack thereof since December, really, when they set all those records? Do you think we're ever going to see all-time highs again based on the dilution and a number of shares now? And what's kind of your outlook in terms of Mara compared to the CleanSparks, the Core Scientific, the Riots this year? Who's going to take the top spot? So you guys answer in whatever order you want, but there's a couple Mara questions for you.
All right, I'll start off. So Marathon performance-wise, I don't know what happened after December. December was like their perfect month that you could ever think of. They were pretty much at 100% uptime. And then after that, their production just went downhill for some reason. I don't know if they were just operating too long or too much in December, where it maybe ruined some machines, some transformers or something, overheated them or something. I don't know. But they're obviously having issues at a couple of facilities with that. So that's obviously not good, right? We're seeing it basically, what is it, like 65% uptime on those machines right now. And that's not great because they should be, and they really should be, the top miner here with what they have in place. But for whatever reason, it seems like every once in a while, they'll get up to a certain spot, they'll do really well, and then they're just knocked back down to where they're having issues with operations or infrastructure or something like that. So it's unfortunate there, because they have so much potential. It's just crazy. But they got to get those things figured out, get those things fixed. And I think if they do those things, they'll do really well going into the second part of the year, basically. As far as what was the other part of it, the question?
Just the all-time high. We've seen people looking for the $80, but a lot of these companies, with the amount of shares they have now compared to when they hit those all-time highs, it's going to be a stretch, I think, unless Bitcoin goes.
You got to remember in 2021 when Marathon hit $80, and it hit $80 for literally, a few days. It spiked, and if you think that 12-month period, Marathon Digital had a market capitalization of about 500 million and went to 8 billion, in very short space of time. And a lot of these other companies did exactly the same. I mean, we mentioned Argo Blockchain. They went from, they grew from 30 million to 1 billion pounds in a space of about 2 months. So Marathon Digital, as Sebastian's alluded to there, December, we thought that was a turning point. But we also, on the podcast in December, we did put in a sort of like, let's just check what January and February's production looks like, because this is something out of the norm. I think if you go back over the last 18 months, there's only been 2 months where Marathon have actually produced anywhere near what they should be with the size of hash rate. And that was in May 2023 and December. And both those months actually was where there was a big spike in fees. And so they benefited from the fees. But it all goes back to, control. And yes, we've seen them purchase some sites in the last few months. And, now they're going to be, when these sites are passed over to them, and actually not all their sites are under their control at the moment. So they've purchased the sites, but, Hut 8 are going to be handing over sites on the 30th of April at the Granbury site and another facility down there. But there's 2 sites being handed over, once they're in the control of Marathon Digital and they've got their staff there managing those sites, then you'd expect, there should be no excuses for production where it should be. They should be utilizing, above 90% of their hash rate, getting the numbers out there. They are the biggest miner in terms of hash rate. I mean, they've got, 2 months ago, it was like 29 exahash. And all of a sudden now we've got an operating hash rate of about 18. That's a drop of 10 exahash. It's just too much. That the amount of money they're missing in terms of revenues for 2024 is just unbelievable. And if we go back, we can go back and look at, there's been a sort of like a trail of issues with Marathon. They have the Harding facility, we had the fire there, next to the coal mine, and that put production at pause there. And then Sebastian, remember they brought all those mining machines from China, didn't put them on containers. No, we'll fly them in. We'll fly them into the US. Yeah. And did they plug them in? Not for 12 months. So they got first class seats in an aeroplane, and they were sat in garages for 12 months before they got plugged in. So, you know, and I'll be honest, I could sit on this call, on this podcast now for about 2 hours and go through every mining company's made mistakes. But Marathon are the biggest miner, and they've made some horrendous mistakes. And you know, at the moment, the control over some of these sites, or the lack of control, is really affecting their production. I want Marathon to be, you know, producing 1,500 Bitcoin every month. Don't get me wrong. And I sort of cringe when I see the totals coming out at 800, 850, and lower than Core Scientific. You know, Marathon Digital was the first stock I purchased. I won't be in this space now if it weren't for purchasing that Marathon Digital, because I wouldn't have bothered looking at any other miner. It was a speculative purchase, and back in 2020, and you know, I did really well out of it, and I've stayed here for 4 years, and it's because of them. But I do cringe when I see their production updates not meeting anywhere near shareholder expectation, and we constantly say next month's going to be better, and inevitably it never is. You know, there's, like I say, there's been 2 months in the last 18. You know, they're sort of like competing with the likes of Argo Blockchain as in terms of production, as you know, for the bottom of my tables on a month by month basis. Now, going back to, will the share price hit $80? Not yet. No, not a long way. Bitcoin price would have to go to something like 300,000 or 400,000 for that price. And bear in mind, Marathon are selling shares every day. You know, at the moment, you know, every time you see their update, it tells you how much cash they've got in the bank. They announce every update there, and you can do the sums, you can do the numbers. They're selling shares. They've got a 1.5 billion at the market offering in place, approved to sell shares. And you know, yes, they want to grow to 50 exahash by the end of 2025, and that's going to cost money. And they want to be buying sites to do it in. That's going to cost money. So they are building a war chest. They've got about 1.5 billion in their treasury at the moment. Now, in terms of shares, they've got something like 250, 260 million shares issue at the moment. When the share price hit 8 billion, there was 100 million shares. So, you know, when you've diluted, you know, effectively, you know, 150% of the company again, to go to the number of shares they got now, that's going to take an enormous change in the Bitcoin price to get to that level. And, you know, the same can be said for other miners as well. Riot Platforms will be in that boat. They've sold, you know, to be honest with you, Riot and Marathon seem to, you know, have grown in terms of shares, you know, matching, you know, share for share effectively over the last few years. They've both got something like 250 million issue, and both had about 100 million in 2021. And Riot Platforms also got very close to 8 billion. So I'd be, you know, I feel a bit disappointed. I'm a Marathon Digital shareholder, so full disclosure. I'm disappointed, you know, in the way they've operated. You know, I mentioned I had a 2-hour conversation with Fred Thiel 2 years ago, that same AIM summit I was talking to earlier, and you know, he was so much on the asset light. You know, he tried to convince me that was the best model going forward, but you know, I couldn't understand. You know, if you are looking after your machines and machines that you are hosting on behalf of other companies, and some of the machines go down, who do you look after first? Do you look after your own, or do you look after theirs? And that's my sort of like, you know, my theory. So Core Scientific is an example where they've got their own self-mining, you know, 19 exahash, 6.5 hosted. You know, where would their priority be if the machines went down? You know, 100 machines in each of their sites went down there. Would they be looking at the self-mining ones first, or look at the hosted ones first? Like, you know, and I think they'd be looking at their own machines first. They get priority. And you know, there might be a contract in place, say they have to do as much as they can for the hosted ones. But you know what? It's a bit like when you drive a hire car. Do you drive the hire car quicker than you drive your own personal car, or in the same style that you drive your own personal car? When you go to a hotel room, do you treat it as your own home? You know,
yeah.
Just look at the analogies. And so, you know, infrastructure has always been the best choice to go forward. And, you know, gladly, Marathon have realized that now. And you know, I would imagine the next 18 months, never mind, you know, 55% totally owned. I reckon it'll get to 100% totally owned, and maybe a small fraction of the likes of like the Abu Dhabi joint venture there, which, you know, that's a joint venture, so I wouldn't include that in the same sums. But you know, in North America, I'd expect them to be 100% infrastructure by the end of 2025.
Yeah. So I'll differ a little bit from you on as far as expectations on the stock price. Can they get back to the all-time high? Recently, they were at $34 just about a month ago or something like that. So Bitcoin was at 70,000 at that point. if Bitcoin goes up to, I think, at least 150, 250,000, maybe like that, I think they will possibly surpass that. Main reason they will surpass is because their hash rate has been, what is it, 28x from where it was back then. They were at 1 exahash, I think, when they reached $80 or something like that. So that also has to be taken into account. Bitcoin's much higher in price value. That gives them more revenue as well. And if they can obviously fix their operations where they're more closer to at least 90, 95% uptime, yeah, I mean, the stock's going much, much higher, I think.
Well, we have a little good old-fashioned bet here. Anthony, less than 80. Sebastian, over 80 if we see a big rally in Bitcoin price.
Well, no, I think if you hear what I said, if the Bitcoin price rallies significantly, I mean, it's at 65 at the moment, and Sebastian is going, if it reaches 150 or more, then of course, you know, you're going to see the impact on share prices for all the miners. But I think if you've got to remember, they're selling, you know, that 250 million shares at the moment is going to increase significantly day by day. You know, we looked at, because it's great, we get these documents that come out, and we looked at the CleanSpark, the at the market offering they had in January. So on the 5th of January, they had $500 million of $500 million of shares, and they in 62 days they utilized it all. Now, that's CleanSpark. What do you think Marathon are doing with the 1.5 billion one? Do you think they're doing 10 shares a day? They'll be selling millions a day. And the reason they're selling millions a day is look at the float that Marathon Digital have on a daily basis. Look at their average trading volume. It's about 40 million. They can sell 10 million shares a day and no one even blink about it. You know, if IREN sold 5 million shares a day or 4 million shares a day with their average at 9 million, that's going to suppress the price, because you're going to have more selling shares being sold than being purchased. So that's going to suppress the price. But Marathon they're a beast in terms of, you know, them and Riot were the first two to list on the NASDAQ. And they are, you know, American miners with American shareholder, you know, who want to invest in American companies. They've benefited from that. And now you've seen other miners join that group. You know, you've seen the likes of TeraWulf, you've seen the likes of CleanSpark join that group there. The ones that struggle are the Canadian miners. You know, the oldest miners, Bitfarms, Hive, Hut, they're the three oldest miners. Go back and check. You know, they've struggled because the Canadian miners. The US miners have had far more investment put into them for being American. And even CleanSpark now, even put in there, you know, as part of their title, CleanSpark is the American miner, you know, because it's the way it is. And CleanSpark's average volume is over 20 million a day. So they've been able to utilize that ATM. So Marathon Digital will be selling millions of shares on a daily basis, using up that 1.5 billion. And guess what? When that 1.5 billion is used up, we'll see another ATM come out for another 1.5 billion. I mean, Riot, we talked about Riots yesterday on the podcast. Riot haven't turned around and put a dollar figure on it. They just turned around and put, you know, a share number on it. So they're going from 340 million shares. Now, at the moment, they're only utilized 260 million of that. They'll have 680 million shares to play with if the AGM is approved. It's being voted at at the next AGM. So they'll have a significant amount of shares to utilize in their ATM, and probably get them all the way to 100 exahash effectively.
Sounds good. Now, no hard feelings here, Dark Vader. We are big fans of Sebastian as well. We're just happy he's on the channel and enjoying it. Guys, we've got a number of questions about Hive. I know, Anthony, you were talking to me about Hive yesterday. We've also got a number about CleanSpark. So which one would you like to do first here?
Let's talk about Hive. Hive is
Sure.
the old dog.
Yeah.
Let's go to Hive. You just mentioned they're one of the oldest miners. Every time we talk to Frank and Aiden on the channel, Anthony, these are super smart guys that know a ton about blockchain, cryptocurrency, network infrastructure. But Hive share price has definitely underwhelmed compared to some of the peers. And I know there's been a lot of frustration from investors saying, hey, you know what? They seem to know what they're doing. They seem to have all the right strategy and plan. The share price is just not keeping up. What is your take there, Anthony?
So, you know, Hive are the oldest miner. And if you go back 2 years ago, or go back 3 years ago, in 2021 and 2022, you can go back through the filings. No miner earned more revenues than in terms of mining, self-mining, than Hive Digital. They outpaced Marathon and all the other big miners. And one of the reasons for that was they were, predominantly an Ethereum miner at that point in time, and the Ethereum revenues were significant. They were earning, millions and millions of dollars every month. And then in September 2022, when the fork occurred and the Ethereum mining stopped, they were left with, 30, 40,000 GPUs that they were unable to use. And they tried to use them to mine other coins. And just to give you an indication, if you go back to the month before that fork, I think they were earning $7 million a month in terms of Ethereum mining. And when the month after the fork, it went down to 200,000 in terms of mining altcoins. So for them, revenues dropped off the end of the cliff. They were starting to grow their Bitcoin hash rate. I think they were like about 2 exahash at the time. So they had a sort of a reasonable amount. I mean, bear in mind, go back 2.5 years ago, and the biggest miner was probably about 3 or 4 exahash at that point in time. No miners with double digits and all this. And it's only happened in the last couple of years. These miners have really, really grown. So Hive was sort of like they had 2 exahash of Bitcoin hash rate, and with a plan to grow that. But all these GPUs that they purchased and still had some value, couldn't really do much with them. And so they were the first company to come out and talk about the HPC business side of it, and that they would grow that. And we're now starting to see some of the fruits come through from that. And we'll be interested to see their quarterly update for the first quarter of 2024, because they gave a plan. And if you look at their presentation, it's in there. They do sort of like, we want to get 1 million of annualized revenue. Then we're going to get to 7 million annualized revenue. Then we're going to get to 15 million annualized revenue. I think at the moment, they're about 10 million of annualized revenue. And so they're still on track to get to that 15 million annualized revenue by the end of the year. And, if they can, get a client the size that Bit Digital or a client similar to IREN or Core Scientific, then numbers will grow. One thing that two things that they do really well. One is they produce some of the highest amount of Bitcoin per machine than any of the other miners. There's only Bitfarms who can compete with Hive Digital. The second thing is their energy cost isn't the cheapest of all the miners. I think they pay about 4.8 blended across their 4 continents that they're in at the moment. So they're in Sweden, they're in Iceland, they're in Canada, US. So they're in they're all over at the moment. So their blended rate's about 4.8. Now we've talked about TeraWulf, a blended rate of about 3.5. When your energy is your biggest price, that's a big cost. Operationally, so this is all the other costs. They are one of the cheapest. So they don't pay themselves extravagant wages like some of the other miners do, and they try to keep all those G&A costs and professional fees, legal fees, travel and subsistence, all those fees low. And so you can see in the updates that they put out that their operating margin is really, really good compared to other miners. But the energy price is not the cheapest. So, it's probably, in terms, it's not the highest, but it's certainly not the cheapest. There's probably 4 or 5 miners at a cheaper rate. But they, when we're talking about hash price, bear in mind they're growing. They're at 4.5 exahash at the last monthly update. Probably be over 5 when we get the next update out, and they've got a plan to grow to 8 by the end of the year. The growth is good. The HPC business looks like it's performing as well. So I think it's one of these that sort of like could come good, but again, it just doesn't get the support that some of the American miners get.
Gotcha. I'm not sure if Sebastian had to drop or if he's having some internet connections.
No, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
You?
Yeah.
Okay, I can hear you. I'm not seeing your video anymore, though.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I don't know if my camera just failed on me or what, but I'm still here.
Bud, you're the techie guy. Anthony and I, this is our first stream. We don't even know how to work anything over here.
That's why I put up the little technical difficulties. Please stand by. I'm trying to fix it.
When we said we were going to do this, Sebastian sent me a picture of his streaming studio, and it had like 15 different devices and switchboards and everything. I'm just on a MacBook here, but apparently the MacBooks are tried and true, Sebastian. I have no technical issues right now.
Yeah, awesome.
But I'm glad we can hear you, because I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one. CleanSpark, you guys. So this is definitely I would say probably the top pick for most people in the space right now in terms of the tier one miners, kind of the big boys. They've shown a lot of consistency. They've delivered on their plans. They have used the ATM quite heavily, but obviously they've had tremendous growth in terms of share price, market cap, exahash. The only miner year to date that's up, although fast forward to next Monday and we might be in a different situation. There you are, Sebastian.
Yeah, back.
Looking good, bud. So what are your thoughts on CleanSpark, guys?
Well, CleanSpark has been, let's go back to Hive a little bit because I want to touch on that one a little bit too. I got into Hive back in 2017, 2018, right? I ran it all the way up through 2021 cycle where I should have sold at that point. The stock was doing really well at that point. I didn't sell. I think we all learned a lesson there. Bitcoin didn't go to 100,000 and I held on to it. I held on to it till the end of pretty much last year. I sold in November, December. I sold the shares that I had. And the reason I got out of it was I didn't see the growth that I was seeing from other miners. And when you're investing in these miners, you want to see growth, obviously, from them because that's what's going to drive overall revenue and things like that. They did stumble on the Ethereum mining side of things. They thought it was going to go on for another couple of years, I think. But there was a lot of companies stumbled on that part. They didn't expect to go from proof of work to proof of stake that fast. But it's just their growth. I think if they were more aggressive in their growth, I probably would have held on to the stock. And I think maybe that's why the stock has been underperforming lately, is because I think Frank has stated that they want to maintain 1% of the Bitcoin network hash rate, which is fine. You want to do that. They're very cost effective that way. They also are very efficient in mining. So in that regard, they're going to do fine. But will they be, like one of the stocks that we're looking for, what's going to do 10, 15x? Probably not, potentially not. They still could, right, depending where Bitcoin goes. But I see more growth in other companies. That's why I kind of got out of it. But I liked Hive for a long time. They're the first one that made me kind of get into the space as far as Bitcoin miners are, public Bitcoin miners are involved. And I started doing data on them, and then that transitioned over to the other miners as well. So I wish them all the best. Now, as far as CleanSpark, CleanSpark was, I started getting into them. When was that? 2020. Where are we at? 2022. So beginning of 2022 is when I started getting into them, right after the bull run of 2021. I started doing research more on the other miners as well, and I liked what I was seeing with them as far as when the company would come out and say they're going to be at X by this time, they got there. They even actually surpassed it. All right, their operations each month they were doing really well with uptime, efficiencies, things like that. They were buying miners that were cheap, right? So they were growing in the bear market where everybody else was kind of getting machines in that they bought in from the bull run at a much higher cost. So that appealed to me. And then I just kind of continued to research them some more. And I started buying the stock more and more. And I mean, here we are 2 years later, and they've basically come from 100 petahash when they started out in January of 2021 to being now at 17 exahash in just 3 years, basically. Not a lot of miners have done that. And that just goes to their track record of operations, performance, and goal setting. And they actually reach those goals. Sometimes they're delayed, right? But nobody's perfect here. But overall, I think their projections as far as growth and everything else has been pretty much the most accurate that I've seen out of the miners here so far.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in 2022, they were the only miner to achieve their growth in that year, which was about to 6 exahash. And I think they achieved about 6.2. In 2023, though, they came out with an ambitious target. I think it was 22 exahash in the very early part of 2023. That was reduced to 20. Then it was reduced to 16, and they achieved 10 at the end of the year. So I go back to my earlier comments on miners with these massive targets. The challenges that face you, the softballs that come out of nowhere, and a few issues affected CleanSpark. Yes, they've got that hash rate up and running. So to go from 10 in December to 17 today, that's amazing, and that's why the share price is the only mining share price to be actually competing with the Bitcoin price. I think they're both about 50% higher year to date, where none of the other miners are actually in the positive. Most of the other miners are about 30% down on average, maybe slightly higher than that. But who knows where they come out on Monday morning. But CleanSpark, bear in mind in October 2023, they were valued at 600 million. And, today, going at the closing price yesterday, they're a $4 billion company.
Yep.
So, yes, they've used that ATM and used it well, and they've sold the company like 3.5 times in the last 18 months, effectively, the number of shares they've got in issue now. So they've got, close to, this, I think there's 230 million shares in issue, and they'll get to 260 million shares if they utilize this current ATM of about 800 million. Maybe slightly more if the share price is less than, I think they based it on $23. So the share price at the moment is about 17. So it might be a few more, but that gets them sort of like between 260 and 300 million shares. Bear in mind, in November 2022, they had 60 million shares in the company. So, if you were a shareholder at that point in time, you're a shareholder now. Yes, the price has gone up, but your percentage shares in the company has drastically reduced effectively. But they've done it really well, and no one can take it away. I think some of the other companies that look at this and think that was the model to use. They did everything at the right time. They sold Bitcoin early on when the Bitcoin price was 69,000. Them and IREN were the two main miners that were selling Bitcoin on a daily basis. And then they chose to hodl for the most of 2023 when the Bitcoin price was rising. So, they've got the secret sauce there at CleanSpark. Again, they've got to get to 32 exahash. So they need to achieve 15 exahash by the end of the year. Now, they've done 7 exahash in the first 4 months. They are currently, obviously, they're going to have to sort of probably purchase facilities that are literally ready to go, because I don't think, to go from scratch to build a site, so to break ground and order these transformers have got up to a 12-month lead time. That's the big issue. Yep. Some of the parts for these sites take so long to order. It's not about building facilities or installing miners. It's getting the power transformers, ordered and delivered to sites. That's the lead time, and that's why when miners come out, look at Corsicana 2 years ago they broke ground, and now they're energizing. It's not an overnight thing. It's not 6 or 7 months. If you've got the transformers on order, add 12 months onto your time frame, because that's how long it's going to take, generally. So I think they'll have to go and buy literally facilities like they've done with these facilities in Mississippi and in Denton, which they recently purchased, ready to effectively go. And that's why they'll get to the 20 exahash in June, no problem. It's how do they get that extra 12 exahash? Machines, no problem. They've got the machines ordered, all paid for. They've got to grow those sites. So, how that'll be interesting to see how they go through that. But Matthew's been on the podcast, and he's been on, he was doing, Spaces meeting most days actually in the last few months. So, he's quite quietly confident that they have these regular meetings, and the first thing they do is they go through their list of things that are the issues list or whatever like that, and they go through that and try to to solve some of the problems they've got at the moment. And obviously on that list there is getting infrastructure.
Yeah, they do have, I think, what do they have, once a week meetings where they're talking about like 24 different sites that they're looking at any point in time. So they're going to be spending, they're going to be throwing a lot of cash around in the next couple of months, I think, to get to where they want to get to, especially the 32 exahash by the end of the year. But they're going to probably be paying a little bit of a premium now because Bitcoin price is where it's at. The fees are where they're at. So it's going to be a little bit of a premium, I think. But nonetheless, they got to do it. But yeah.
Now, moving along here, guys, I've seen a couple comments, Argentina, Germany represented in the comments. So make sure you guys let us know where you're watching from. Awesome to see, as they say, the multinational team here. We've got UK, US, and good old Canada. Next questions for you boys. We're moving into some of the, well, Hut 8 isn't a smaller miner, but I want to get into Bit Digital a little bit, talk about Griffin. Some of those have come up. Sato Technologies, Soluna, but we've had a few in here about Hut 8 and Asher's new leadership. Now, interestingly enough, with the hash price sitting where it's at right now, this almost benefits the miners who have been selling on a daily basis because we haven't seen a big jump in Bitcoin price. So companies like maybe say Hut, who have a large hodl, they're not going to benefit as much from this surprise as maybe an IREN or someone that's selling into the strength right now in terms of Bitcoin, or in terms of the transaction fees and Bitcoin price, I guess. Now, interestingly enough, we've had Griffin on the channel. We started watching them pretty closely in our analysis, Anthony. This is one that a lot of people are talking about. And Sebastian, you say you're some stocks you're looking for returns 10x, 15x. Do you think it's going to be these smaller up and coming miners where you see those big returns, or some of the more established like the CleanSparks or the Bitfarms or HUD 8. So maybe I'll pose the question there. Where do you see the biggest opportunity right now, Sebastian? And then we can move into HUD 8 strategy here.
I think it's the bigger miners, right? So Marathon, Riot, CleanSpark, Bitfarms, IREN, Wolf, Cypher, those guys, the guys that are going to be growing into this new halving cycle that we are in. Those guys will benefit the most because we saw the same thing happen with the miners last cycle. At least you saw Marathon go, 7,000% up from where they bottomed out to where they peaked, right? And that was based on Marathon's promises of growth, getting to 23 exahash and whatever that was, right? That drove the stock up. So I expect the same kind of results happening this time around with the larger miners growing to be larger. They will take a lot of the capital away from the smaller miners that are at 1 exahash or under an exahash or 2 exahash, right? They're only growing 500 petahash or 1 exahash or something like that. They're not going to get the capital that the larger miners are getting right now.
Fair enough. And what are your thoughts on HUD 8?
HUD 8, oh man, well, that was a mess for over the last 2 years. I don't know even where to begin. I wasn't a fan of them in the beginning. I wasn't a fan of them back in 2023, 2022, where they pretty much hodled everything. They were diluting shares. They weren't growing much. Not a big fan of that. I wasn't a fan of it. And they started kind of settling a little bit to their hodl in 2023, which was at least nice to see that they weren't diluting shareholders just to pay operations, pay themselves bonuses and everything else on top of it to hodl. Now, they got into data centers, which was kind of nice to see them kind of break out a little bit into that. That was through Jamie Leverton, her role there. And she had data center experience from, I believe she was in IBM or some place like that. But that's kind of where the company kind of pivoted to more data center centric than Bitcoin mining, I think, at that point. They got into also the mining with Ethereum. They bought a bunch of miners at that point as well for GPU miners for mining Ethereum. They were thinking that's going to last kind of like what Hive was doing, but didn't last as long. And then they're transitioning over to HPC as well. So there's all that. And then you had the merger with USBTC happen, and they kind of almost like went in idle mode, right? They didn't buy any new machines to replace some of the older machines that they had. They have machines that are like 80, 90 terahash miners, and those things should have been replaced a year ago. But they didn't do any of that. They weren't spending it on that, which is unfortunate. And then they went through the merger, and then we have a new CEO, Asher Ganut. And quite honestly, I have nothing against the guy, but I just don't see him, or at least things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for growth out of these companies. I'm not seeing that from him. And that's unfortunate because I think that's what investors are ultimately looking for, right? They're trying to be as sensitive to dilution as possible. I get that, okay, but is dilution sometimes accretive? And you do have a huge hodl stack. Could you use that as well? They do have some debt that they can pay down as well. So there's all these things that they have that could really propel them going forward, but it seems like they're too skittish to do really anything ambitious, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think if you go back to 2021, and I talked about it earlier, HUT were a favorite. Market cap reached in 2021, the market cap at HUT reached $2.5 billion. Today, this is having merged with USBTC, it's probably closer to 700 million. So if you think about, they're a merger of equals, that puts, HUT half that amount in terms of what they put to the table. The one thing you've got to look at the moment is their valuation.
They're being valued on their hodl.
Their hodl's about the valuation. So if you look at what assets they've also got, if you look at the book value on the balance sheet, they've got about $1 billion of net assets. So for every dollar you're investing in HUT, you're getting about $1.30 in terms of asset value, which is really good. There's only IREN who can compete with that in the sort of mid-tier and above. You put $3.80 into CleanSpark, you get $1 of assets. That's that shows you that at the moment, CleanSpark. I think Cypher also, great that they are at the moment. The valuations are really high. So there's two questions: are they overvalued, or are all these other miners undervalued? Sebastian's hit the nail on the head there. They haven't shown the growth. I mean, HUT were. 2 years ago, I saw presentations which they removed from the website that said they were going to grow to 6 exahash by the end of 2022, and it didn't happen. It kept dropping to 3.5, then 2.5, and then they bought the this HPC business. They bought the 5 data centers. And I thought, at the end of the day, you've got some solid revenues coming in there. Revenues that they're going to come in every month. If you've got contracts, it's guaranteed revenues, which appeals to why a lot of these miners are going in there. You don't have to worry about Bitcoin price. If the revenue is $1.5 million a month, but that's what your revenue is going to be, and you know what your costs are, you know what your margins are. It's a good business. So what they brought to the table, they had the hodl. In real terms, they had over 9,000 coins, and not many miners could compete with that. I mean, it's still second to Marathon Digital at the moment. USBTC, on the other hand, they had sites, infrastructure, power, but no money. They had nothing. They were really struggling. I mean, they were struggling to an extent that I was in a conference in Amsterdam last year, and there was talk about them having to sell sites because the merger hadn't gone through. They had real cash flow issues. And, the trouble is, when you're a mining company looking to sell sites, you're looking to sell sites to a miner. And so I was in a conversation with about 5 or 6 different CEOs, and, they were talking about USBTC then as having those, issues. So the merger occurred in November. And so that alleviated some of those issues there. They've got obviously their fleet needs to be replaced. That's something that Hive have been doing as we're speaking now. So I can tell you now that Hive have probably got about 1.5, 2 exahash machines that they've replaced. So they, going back to the, would miners put less efficient machines up and running? Maybe Hive Digital could be one of those companies that do that. Hut haven't replaced. We've not seen. Well, I can't even. Sebastian, can you remember last time we saw an order for Hut?
2021, I think.
So they're using machines that are probably less than 100 terahash a second, and the efficiency on that they've got one of the sort of in terms of not a good thing. They've got one of the highest efficiencies, but it's not. It's a high efficiency number, but it doesn't mean they're efficient. So I think their efficiency is sort of between 30 and 35. So it's towards the higher end of the scale. And when you consider that the likes of Marathon, CleanSpark, IREN, TeraWulf, all getting close to 24 joules per terahash, and then you've got some of the other miners are operating in the 30s. That makes a significant difference in terms of power costs, because your less efficient miners means you're using more power to mine Bitcoin. So and if you haven't got a great Bitcoin price, that's a double whammy for the company. It means they're paying more for the power, and they're having to provide more power to mine the same Bitcoin as their competitors. So Ash has said in the podcast, and we had him on the show. I think we had him on the show about 4 times in the space of a few weeks, actually. But we managed to get one of the podcasts out. He sort of indicated that judge them in Q3 when they've got a chance to input some of their plans. Now we've seen they've done some good business lately with sites. So they've handed some sites back to Marathon, and they were able to get a year of revenues by handing those sites back. So Marathon wanted those sites, they wanted the control, but there was a catch to that. They had to pay a year of revenues to get out the contract. So Hut will walk away with over $13 million from handing over the Granbury site to Marathon on the 30th of April. And they've also made some sort of strategic purchases recently. And so, certain things are going well for them. But, I think, Sebastian, you hit the nail on the head. You need to get the machines replaced. You need to get more efficient miners. We need to see an order in there. I think we questioned Asher with the price that, their peer group have been paying in the last sort of 8-9 months, around about the $14 to $16 a terahash for the latest Bitmain machines, or the equivalents produced by MicroBT, when miners were paying, and Hut would have been included that, we're paying $40, $50, $60 a terahash back in 2021. Now's your opportunity to get in there and do that, and they haven't moved. And so, for me at the moment, I'm not buying any Hut shares at the moment, but I'll wait for that Q3 to see if they start to some of the changes that Ash has implemented, put in place, and let's see what happens then.
Okay, guys, now we're going to move into a couple of the smaller miners here. We were going to only go for an hour. We'll probably go for maybe an hour and 45 minutes, another 15 minutes or so. Sebastian, are you okay time-wise?
Yeah, I could do another 15 minutes.
I know you got a family and kids. I got the same deal here. So we'll wrap it up pretty quick, but I am seeing Bitcoin prices surging now, guys, close to 65.5. I think 65,400. So that's awesome.
Is that because of this podcast, do you think?
I believe so, yeah.
We're pumping it.
I think so. It's directly because of this. So if we get Bitcoin going up, we've got the transaction fees, we've got runes. We talked about that at the start of the podcast. To be honest, I don't know a ton about runes either, so we'll probably have to learn more about that, and we can do a podcast on that next week. Anthony, obviously,
I live an hour away from Stonehenge, if that helps.
Yeah, we'll get you out there on location and maybe do the stream from Stonehenge. The other thing I wanted to say, you guys, we got 2 pinned comments here. So our good friend at LTD Lawn Service, I guess if you need any lawn care, give a hit the like button for the boys. That would be great. Also, we just got a new member, you guys. We've been known to send out some swag boxes. I know you have a lot more members than I do, Sebastian. Once you get 8 of them, they show up on the channel. So I'd like to at least get 8. We're only at 6. But maybe if you want to become a member, we can mail you out a hat or a t-shirt or something like that. But now back to the regular show here, you guys. I want to talk about some of the smaller miners. So we talked a little bit about Bit Digital in relation to their HPC contract. Another one that's come up quite a bit in the comment section is Griffin. Obviously, Sato, Soluna, DMG. What are your guys' thoughts on this segment of miners?
I'll make mine pretty short and sweet here. I actually removed a lot of smaller miners because they're not growing beyond what they're at. So I figured my time is going to be a little bit more better spent on the miners that are growing tremendously here in the next 12 to 24 months. And then with them being so much smaller, their market cap is so small, it's going to be hard for them to raise capital unless they pull debt, which is probably not going to be at advantageous interest rates either. So they have a lot of headwinds going for them. I think their best option is to kind of wait it out right now, go into the bull run here, get the price of the stocks up much higher, and then pull on that ATM as hard as you can and as fast as you can to prepare for the bear market and build out at that point.
Yeah, I noticed Sebastian had done a poll to look at which miners he should continue with, and there was about 6, 7 that he's reduced. We've talked about this in our podcast as well, Bryce. The challenge is now you've got the miners that can raise capital easier than other miners, and the ones that can't struggle to grow. So Sato Technology hasn't grown hash rate in the last 12 months. They've been at that sort of like just over half an exahash. They do everything they do with that half an exahash is really, really good in terms of metrics. There's not many miners can compete, but it is a small miner, and yes, they're looking at HPC as well, but it's about having the revenues to grow, and it's even though the price of machines is reasonable at the moment, it's the cost of infrastructure. Obviously, you've got to increase manpower to manage these because you're going to be self-mining bigger facilities or additional facilities, so there's going to be some extra costs there. And even if we look at if we go back a couple of years ago, and when say Marathon and Riot were about 3 exahash each, and they were sort of like considered then like to be the biggest miners, and you had the likes of DMG about half an exahash growing to 1 exahash, and you've seen Marathon grow 10 times since that period, and some of these smaller miners have just about maybe doubled. So DMG at the moment, 1.1 exahash, but they're having machines installed as we do this podcast. So I think by the end of June, that gets them close to 2 exahash. Now they do it again. It's they do everything really well. They mine profitably. They produced a profit in 2023. So I know there's people on here. We haven't discussed Cypher in a great amount of detail. But Cypher made a loss of 25 million in 2023, and some of these miners we're talking about, Sato and DMG, made a profit in 2023. So they do things well, but it's on a small scale. And how do you get to the next level? Is and I think Sebastian's articulated that as well. That's the challenge. They haven't got the share capital. The share price is quite low. So I think Sato and DMG, you're into the sort of like the just a bit above a penny stock. But DMG, I think the market capitalization DMG probably about 70 million, and 2 or 3 years ago that was fine. I mean, a lot of the miners were sort of like maybe 100 million, something like that. But it's you're now looking at 70 million versus, 2 miners that are in excess of 4 billion. And so the haves are growing. The haves are growing bigger than the have-nots. The gap is just getting bigger and bigger, and it's just a case of how whether they can, whether some of these smaller miners can merge and and create growth that way. I don't know. That might be an option for some of the smaller miners to look at. If that's an option. One thing I say about DMG, they do a lot of things. They build infrastructure for other miners. They created the marathon mining pool. They created software, firmware for these mining sites that tells you when the mining machines are not working efficiently, and so you can go in and make replacements to those machines. So they've done, and they do a lot of other stuff apart from just self mining. But again, it's sort of on a small scale. And it's how do you get to the next level? How does DMG get to 3, 4, 5 exahash? How does Sato technology get to 1 or 1.5 exahash? And that's the questions. I think Soluna is quite interesting. I mean, Soluna is of the three of them significantly the smallest. However, in terms of hash rate, it's got more hash rate than Sato technology. If you look at the hosting business and add the self-mining together, it's got about 2.5 exahash in that business there. They've announced they're going to use 2 megawatts for their HPC business. Now, 2 megawatts doesn't sound a great deal, but Bit Digital are using 3 megawatts to create 50 million of revenue, annualized revenue. So what's 2 megawatts going to deliver for Soluna? And we had this on the podcast the other day, and actually someone came back with the right answer. So we give him a little tick in his homework box there, a little star. And he gets a nice little treat the next day to go to school with, and so that's all worked out there. But Soluna's I like the facilities that they build. If you look at mining facilities, and Sebastian, you've owned your own mining facilities. Look at the pictures of Soluna's sites and compare that to some of the air-cooled sites that other miners use. Yeah. They're pretty much they look like state of the art, and they build sites for other miners as well. So they're trying to do other things, but again, market capitalization of Soluna is less than 10 million. And, they're getting closer to 1 exahash. I think they've got about 850 petahash. So not far away from 1 exahash. They've got 1.6 in hosted, and they've got a HPC business that's about to take off. I think they're one of the ones that's overlooked. I don't think, people do enough research into Soluna. You might see some benefit of doing that piece of work. Remember, some of these miners that we talk about in the mid-tier, top tier, you just mentioned CleanSpark were nothing 3 years ago. And so which of these small miners gets to be like a CleanSpark in 3, or a big miner in 3 years' time? Is it possible? That's the $64 million question. And I don't know, out the three of those small miners, and Griffin Mining as well. I mean, we've had Rob on the podcast very recently, actually, and they operate with less than 1 exahash. I think it's about 0.9. And, he was saying, they want to get to 10 exahash. They want to increase, tenfold. And, he's got a sort of like a finance background in the markets. And, he might know a little bit more about raising capital than others in a space like that. But that's going to be interesting. So those 4 are what we consider to be the 4 of the smaller miners. Who knows which one goes through? But I suggest that some of those that people do a bit more due diligence. They're all mining at low prices, so they can produce Bitcoin at low prices. They're making profits, but it's on a smaller scale than the bigger numbers.
Yeah, they sure are. Okay, guys. Well, I think that's timely enough. Sebastian, it looks like you're having more camera issues there. I know we wanted to do an hour. We did an hour 37. I think the highest I saw was 289 people listening live. Sebastian, I don't know how that compares to a regular one on your podcast, but I think we did pretty good our first time through here, you guys. Obviously, a lot of excitement in the space. Nobody expected the hash price to be where it is now post-halving. This bodes extremely well for the miners. We're also seeing Bitcoin rally. This should be a pretty exciting week coming up. Sebastian, thanks so much for your time here today. Next one of these, we'll probably have to do these more frequently, you guys. Maybe we'll switch between the channels or something, Sebastian.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
We really appreciate you coming. Anthony, always a pleasure. Have a great rest of the weekend, guys. And looking forward to Monday. Should be a very, very nice green day for us.
Let's hope so.
Here's to that. Have a good one, guys.
Okay. Have
Take
a
care.
great weekend, you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.